following definitions have been inserted, amended or deleted. Alternative solution. The defined term has been amended to include reference to performance solution. Assessment method. The defined term has been amended to include the new defined terms performance solution and deemed to satisfy solution. Boiler is a new defined term that has been inserted as a consequence of including Specification G2.2. Deemed to satisfy is a new defined term deemed to satisfy solution. Effective height. The defined term has been amended to clarify the lowest story selected for determination. Expert judgment. The defined term has been amended to include the new defined terms performance solution and prescriptive solution. Farming is a new defined term, has been inserted as a consequence of including provisions for farm buildings and farm sheds. Farm building is a new defined term as a consequence of including provisions for farm buildings. Farm shed is a new defined term as a consequence of also including provisions for farm sheds. Farm vehicle is a new defined term as a consequence of including provisions for farm buildings and farm sheds. Fire compartment. The terms objective and functional statement have been removed as these defined terms are no longer used in the NCC. Fire protected is a new defined term as a consequence of new massive timber construction provisions. Massive timber is a new defined term as a consequence of including provisions for fire protected timber. Non-illuminated exit sign is a new defined term as a consequence of including provisions for farm buildings. Performance requirement. The defined term has been amended to include the new defined terms performance solution and deemed to satisfy solution. Performance solution is a new defined term and is a method of complying with the performance requirements other than by a deemed to satisfy solution. Pressure vessel. A new defined term has been inserted as a consequence of including Specification G2.2. Verification method. The defined term has been amended to include the new defined term performance solution. There have been a number of definition changes in Volume 1 for this year. Most of these are related to other changes. For example, there are some new definitions for new concessions for farm buildings, and we will look at those definitions later. However, there is one definition change which isn't related to other changes, and that is the defined term effective height. You might recognise this diagram, which is in the current guide to Volume 1 of the NCC. Effective height is a concept which is used in the BCA to determine when various provisions apply and when certain concessions don't apply. An example is A1.1, which requires a building to be sprinkler protected when its effective height exceeds 25 metres. Currently, effective height is the height from the floor of the topmost story, which isn't only a plant room, to the floor of the lowest story, providing direct egress to the road or open space. Identifying the topmost story hasn't been a problem. However, in recent years, there has been varying opinions as to which is the lowest story that provides direct egress to a road or open space. So the provisions have been simplified. The highest story identified in a calculation of effective height remains the topmost story, which basically doesn't contain only a plant room. However, the lowest story identified is now the lowest story counted in a determination of the rise in stories. The rise in stories of a building is an existing concept which, like effective height, acts as an important trigger in the BCA. For example, rise in stories is directly related to the type of construction and therefore a range of provisions, particularly fire resistance. BCA C1.2 contains clear instructions as to how to calculate the rise in stories, and the guide to Volume 1 already contains commentary on how to identify the lowest story in a rise in stories. So in effect, we've removed any ambiguity about which levels you need to select when calculating effective height. Now I'll outline changes to the definitions in both volumes. The climate zone map has been amended for both Volume 1 and Volume 2. It reflects some changes to the local government boundaries in Queensland.
BCA 2016 introduces a new specification, A1.1, as a consequence of the new provisions for fire-protected timber. It contains requirements for fire-protected timber and procedures for determining the time at which the temperature at the interface between the protection system and the timber is exceeded. The specification contains two streams. The first stream is general requirements under Clause 2.1 and can apply to any timber construction, but would generally apply to a timber-framed element, for example, top and bottom plates, studs and noggings. The next stream is massive timber under Clause 2.2, that is, cross-laminated timber, CLT, glulam and the like. Clause 2.1, general elements, must be protected to achieve the FRL required of the element. It must also have a covering which resists incipient spread of fire for not less than 45 minutes. In the absence of a spread of fire test, 2 layers of 13mm fire-grade plasterboard can be used instead. Under Clause 2.2, massive timber must achieve the FRL required of the element. Instead of a spread of fire, must pass the test which measures the temperature at the interface between the fire protection and the timber. Table 1 gives the minimum time in minutes until the interface reaches 300 degrees Celsius. In the absence of the test, there is a minimum thickness of fire-grade plasterboard given in Table 1. Because massive timber has an inherent resistance, you generally end up with a slightly less fire-grade plasterboard for massive timber than for general timber construction. Both requirements can be met by the same system. As you can see, we're coating the elements with fire-grade plasterboard for different requirements. Firstly, to achieve the FRL, and secondly, to resist incipient spread of fire or to keep the temperature below 300 degrees Celsius. I need to clarify that the fire-grade plasterboard we use for one of the requirements can also be used to meet the other requirements. You don't need to put on 2 layers of 13mm to get 90 minutes and then put on another 2 layers to meet your resistance to the incipient spread of fire requirements. You only need to put on 2 layers to achieve both requirements. That's what fire-protected timber is. Timber elements protected with fire brigade plasterboard to achieve the requirements of Specification A1.1.